describe.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
Right.
Okay. As with the STAR, and probably evolving from Smalltalk, the idea was to use an object-oriented desktop, which meant that we worked with documents and tools. We didn't talk about applications and disk files and processes because those weren't relative to what the user was used to in his environment. It was a desktop metaphor, but we did recognize that it was still a computer, and in a few places we in fact made that quite clear, things like disks, because they weren't file cabinets, they were disks, and you had to do certain things with them that you didn't do with file cabinets. The interaction style was WYSIWYG, direct manipulation, and importantly, rather different from the STAR, it was select and use a menu. So now we'll drop into the demo, and we'll go through these topics in about 20 minutes. Notice the transitional animation. People have been afraid of things jumping out of them since day one. And so we tried to soften that. We didn't want windows just popping up in the middle from nowhere, kind of disconnected from the user action. Here I've opened up 4 different documents. We had different document types. Basically, the background for this group was, of course, an Apple II, separate applications. Each application had a different object type or a different document type. So in this case, I've opened up a calc, a spreadsheet, a graph, a project, which was a timeline type of thing, and a drawing program. One of the things that differentiated Lisa from the STAR was that it was what I would call true direct manipulation. You just grab the object and move it. You didn't do a first select, then hit a move key, and then point somewhere, or perhaps drag it, depending on what the case was. And of course, we obviously had overlapping windows, which the early STAR didn't, and one of the reasons for doing that was because we had such a small screen. We didn't have a 2-page display. One of the things that we felt that was very important in this was that we have, to use a phrase, pixel-perfect graphics. Most systems, in fact, as far as I know, all systems, but I may be incorrect, at that time, when you moved the window, it left a hole. It didn't refresh the background. You actually had a menu command to refresh the desktop or the other windows that were corrupted when you moved something. In this case, I'm going to move this over to the side. Notice there are 3 windows behind it. And what's going to happen, I'm going to describe it to you because it's going to be happen so fast you'll have to look. There will be, the window frames will be immediately redrawn, and then they will fill in, I hope, from front to back. They were supposed to. So you see the content filling in sequentially front to back. At that time, they tended to use painter algorithm, which means it was like laying down paint. When you had overlapping objects, they would first draw the thing in back, then draw the next thing over it, and then the next thing over that. And what you saw was a lot of visual noise, a lot of visual flashing. So the intention here was to eliminate that and create as stable a visual image as possible. And for that, Bill Atkinson developed a update region concept, and this was an application of it. In fact, it was so complete that Bill came into my office one day and said, "Let me show you what I've done." He turned on the machine. He said, "Okay, now draw a figure 8 using the mouse." And you know what that looks like, right? On the screen, nice and uneven all the way around. He said, "Okay," and he pushed a button, and text started smoothly scrolling through it, clipped perfectly at the edges as it went up. And that set a standard for graphics that, in fact, I don't think we've fully accomplished industry-wide yet. It's just something we should be doing all the time. One of the other things that we did here, this is multitasking operating system. In a later release, this is actually the 3rd release that you're seeing, which is not very different in terms of the user interface. As a window was deactivated, it was given a chance to save a graphic of what was in its window. And if it did that, then the desktop manager would use that in refreshing windows. And that meant that we didn't have to swap in a lot of applications and do disk swapping in order to just repaint the windows and back. It did a lot to improve the overall feel. The setup was such that you could start using the front window immediately, even when it had to swap in the other applications, but it was slow and sluggish and very distracting. One of the capabilities Remember, we got 1% of the processing power here, folks. One of the things the model in handling documents was that if you were working on them, you could either set them aside or put them away. In this case, I'm going to set this aside, and you'll see it kind of animate back, and it's now actually an icon on the desktop. In order to be able to get a hold of that, we could actually pull down the desk menu on the left, and the desk menu on the left had a list of every icon that was on the desktop. So this was a way of getting at things that were obscured. The ones that are checked, you'll notice, are the windows that are actually open. So if I just click on or select Calc, then this window comes back. To make it easier to, one of the other things I want to mention is that when you activated a window, only one window at a time came forward. Again, this was document-centric, not application-centric. In systems today, you'll often find that when you click on, say, one Word window, all the Word windows will come forward, or one drawing window, all the drawing windows will come forward. That's application orientation. What we did is we wanted to make it simple to work on a graphic and a text document relatively side by side, or at least overlapped, and to be able to move back and forth of those with a minimum of distraction, even if you had other windows. So just clicking on one window brought that document forward. To simplify context switching, there was a way of setting everything aside. And notice again the transitional animations. Let's see, where are we? Again, keeping with the document orientation rather than an application orientation, notice that there's no quit. There is a set aside and a save and put away, which are equivalent of close operations, but there's no quit. The desktop manager managed all the processes, so the user never started an application, they never quit an application. On the desktop manager would keep one version of a process around running, even if it didn't have any windows open. Most of the applications handled multiple windows at one time. But even if there were no windows open, it would keep a process running. And so when you went to open another document of that type, the process was already initialized, and all it had to do was open the document. The difference went from about 45 seconds doing an initial start up an application, that is, start up the process, initialize it, and open a document, down to around generally 10 to 15 seconds, which is still long. It's much too long. Even today, it's too long. But it was a terrific improvement in terms of the usability of the system and their perception, users' perception. As an aside, one of the things I'd like to show you is that we used something called placeholders. Most of you are familiar that when you open something from the desktop, it leaves some sort of graphic behind to indicate where it was. But the systems generally today don't leave anything inside of a folder to tell you where that belonged. So for example, if I take this and drag it out, notice there's still a place left for it. What this meant was that you could actually arrange things spatially, group them if you would, in a way that you like them, move them to the desktop because you were working on them, and when you put them away, it actually went back to the same location rather than going to the first available location. It's a small thing, but it actually made spatial layouts useful. You can do that today, but it takes more work. Again, keeping with the document-centric nature of the interface, there was no new command in the menu, in the application, or in the menu either. In fact, there was no way to start an application without opening a document. To create a new document, there was stationery of various kinds, and you would use the same double-click action that you used to open it to create a new document. So, Dave, this is the answer to your question. We created stationery which you could not modify. And when you went to create a new document, it just tore off a new version, and you could open that up and use it. And you never, to give you an example here, I'm going to open the blank paper, and we'll create a new piece of stationery. Many of us don't need to use too many forms, at least that we create in our daily life, given the nature of the work that we do. I don't know, I'm assuming that. But there are a lot of people that do. So I'm going to take this. I assume this is a form that I've created, a template for something. And now I'll just point at it and say make stationary. Please. And when this comes away, you'll notice the icon has changed slightly, and now it looks like a little stack of documents, and that was the indication this was stationary. And if you wanted to change it, you just create a new document, made the changes, and save that as stationary. I'm going to take this because I don't really want it, and I'm going to throw it in the trash can. We call it a wastebasket, actually. And what we did is, the reason for the wastebasket was to eliminate the problem of double delete. Delete this. Are you sure you want to delete this? Comes up the dialog, and you press the button and says, yes, I do. And it becomes a very automatic action, and what happens with a lot of dialogues that meant to protect you is the default action is, in fact, the unsafe action. And the result is, well, let me describe something that somebody mentioned to me. I won't mention the name today in a session. They wanted to empty the wastebasket. So they went to click on the wastebasket and say, empty trash. But they accidentally selected the disk. And a dialog came up, and the dialog said, do you want to initialize this? And even as the hand reached for the return key, the person said, oh, this is a disk, I don't want to do this. But the hand had a life of its own. Bang! And they lost their disk. The wastebasket, how to get things out of the wastebasket. What happens was, when you threw something into the trash, it removed from the trash what was already there. So it was kind of like a one-level undo. So there was no need to go up and say empty trash at some later time. If you look at the Macintosh system of today, they've actually created a triple delete. So you put something in the trash, and then it stays there until you say empty trash. And then when you say empty trash, it puts up a dialog and says, are you sure? They do make it very difficult to remove things. A thing we've tried recently in a new system is a timed delete. So things will stay in there for a period of time, maybe 2 days, but generally user settable. And the garbage collector just comes around, the janitor, comes around every couple of days and empties the trash. We didn't have a chance to do that. We didn't think of it. Otherwise, we might have done it. How are we doing? Okay. I'd like to talk now a little bit about the save model. In the star, every change you made was permanent. The document was always saved. It was a little bit like HyperCard, if you're familiar with that system, that came along a little later. And as Dave said, unfortunately, there was no delete, so you couldn't even, or undo, so you couldn't even undo the last thing. We did have undo, but we put it in a menu, so if we didn't implement it, we could have taken it out. At any rate. So here's a document, and if we scrolled around, you would say, look, it's kind of a floor plan for a kitchen. Not too relevant. Here I'm going to, again, this is, noticeably different from the star, where you sort of had letter set type paste-its that you copied and pasted in. Here you picked up a tool and drew it, which is pretty similar to what most of you are familiar with today. So I've made a change. And my boss walks in and says, here, I want you to work on this, and he hands me a diskette. Now, you don't say, well, nobody does that anymore, but we do have larger removable media now, things like zip drives and other things. So I'm going to go, and I need to free up my diskette drive, so I go to select the diskette, and I eject it. Now, on a Macintosh today, it would say, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Something is in use, in parentheses. You guess what it is. Oh, dear. I'll explain this in a moment. In a Windows system, it ejects the diskette. What we were going to see, and it didn't happen, was that actually the document would be automatically suspended and the diskette ejected. Let me try this once again. I have a feeling it's not going to work, though. My disk is probably corrupted. Okay. I guess I have to tell you, sorry this worked all day, so if you came this morning, you saw this happen. What happens is the diskette comes out. The window goes away and the diskette comes out into your hand. And what's happened is that nothing was saved, but all the edits are persistent. Here I'm waving the diskette around. See it? Then when I finished, I would put when you were finished and ready to resume this, either on this machine or on another machine, you would put it back in. What happened is when the diskette was ejected, the document was suspended and all edits were written out to a suspend file, separate from the regular document. When I put this diskette back in, you would see the diskette reappear, the icon come out onto the desktop, and this window would open. And then some of the applications, the spec was that you could actually undo the last change you made, even after that. This one unfortunately didn't do this. Given what I've just seen, I'm not sure the following is going to work either. But what you could do, right, is you could say, you can see it here a little bit. Oh, I don't have the app. You could say revert to previous version. I'll probably be able to do this anyway. And so what you could do is you could remove all the changes you made since you last saved the document. Now, the system was designed to be robust. The applications periodically put out this edits file, kind of an autosave, but it didn't overwrite your existing saved document. When the system was turned off or when a diskette was ejected, excuse me, the document was suspended. Here I'm going to do undo the changes, revert. It's been a while since I've used this, but it really is my system. And by the way, it was really 10 years ago. The Lisa clock stopped turning over in 1995. We don't have a year 2000 problem. So the idea here was that save was something you did when you wanted to because you had made a set of changes to a document that brought it up into a new consistent state. That was the only time you ever might have wanted to save, and it was actually you never actually had to save if you didn't want to, but then you couldn't revert. You did not have to save because you were paranoid. You did not have to save because you removed the diskette. You did not have to save because you turned the system off. That made revert useful because the last saved version was a version which you thought was consistent. Essentially, we had kept two versions of the document, the current working version and the saved one. And had we had time, we probably would have added a real versioning system that would keep them later. Now, where was that suspend file? Well, it turns out that the icons on the desktop are not disk files. The icon on the desktop is an object, and behind it may be 0, 1, 2, 3, and disk files. The user never dealt with disk files directly. What this did was it kept down the number of icons on the desktop. There wasn't a second icon for the suspend file. There was not a second icon for perhaps a lock file or something of that nature. The Lisa list program kept a disk file for each index into this flat file that it managed. You only saw one icon and you only dealt with one icon. And when you transferred something to another place, everything worked. You never had a chance of corrupting the object by accidentally removing or losing one of the disk files because of something you did accidentally. How are we doing for time? Okay. I'm going to tell you about something very briefly because we don't have much time. We use separate applications. We expected other applications to be written. So one of the things we wanted to do, oh, there's something from earlier editing. We used a clipboard and we defined several standardized data interchange formats. So for graphics, it was a picked file. There was text, there was tabbed text, which was a form of, which was tables. And virtually every application could copy its data as one of those forms. It would go on the clipboard, and you can paste it into virtually all of the other documents. So while it was dead in the sense that you couldn't edit it once you had transferred it, it did give us the ability to integrate virtually any kind of data type. Virtually is a word that says I'm lying, not every. There were a couple that wouldn't. Virtually every kind of data type from every kind of document to every other kind of document. So my Gantt chart, I could move from my project management and paste it into my Write document. We didn't have smart objects, but that was partly because we felt we didn't have time, and we were a multi-application environment. So that's a little bit about cut and paste and the clipboard and common data interchange formats. Lastly, I'd like to talk about another way that we tried to make the system simple. Let's start off, and we're just going to duplicate a document. And what we did here is had a duplicate command, and we created a blinking icon which represented the duplicate that you were about to make. You could then take and drag it to and put it wherever you wanted it to be, rather than immediately duplicating it on the same storage, the same disk. We expected a diskette-based system. There might not have been room. And it also prevented kind of copying it once to the diskette it was on and then copying it again to some other place, so that's really where you wanted it. Now what this did is it kind of gave us kind of an ugly, what's happening here? Well, it thought I dropped, okay. That's the duplicate right there on the desktop, and it's on the same storage medium. And what this did is it gave us a way of doing a lot of other things. So for example, if that document was too large for the diskette, it would bring up a dialog and say, it's too large, would you like us to split it across several diskettes? And you could say yes, and it would ask for diskettes in turn. You could back up the hard disk in exactly the same way. I'm not going to show you because it takes too long, as you might expect. But you would just say duplicate and drop it on a diskette, and it would come up with a dialog and say, do you want to back this up? Do you want to do a full backup or an incremental backup? And you would start doing the diskette dance again. If you wanted to duplicate a diskette, you would point to the diskette and say duplicate, and it would say, do you want to copy this to another diskette? You might copy it to the hard disk, is why it asked the question. And if you said yes, it would suck everything off of that disk, eject the disk, and ask for a new one, and when you put it in, it would write everything out. So this one duplicate action, this is in the style of star in some sense, was used to duplicate something, to make a copy somewhere else, to back up, to duplicate diskettes. And these were all built in. They weren't separate utilities in the system. These were things that the user did all the time. The user didn't have to know about running this utility or that utility. They just used the basic duplicate and copy actions. One thing I do want to say, the Mac takes a lot of heat for this. I'm going to drag this over to this diskette and drop it, and it's going to take a little while to do it. What happens is Lisa does a move. Now let's say I'm working on something and I wanted to give Rod a copy of a document. And I just sort of grab the icon and drag it over and drop it on the diskette. Pop out the diskette. That's why we fail later. There's not enough space left. I would take out the diskette, give it to Rod, and he would go off. And guess what? I don't have the document anymore. Because it was a move. Nice and consistent, but it creates an error situation which is really hard to recover from because Rod just got on a plane and took off for Florida. Okay? So while the Mac does an inconsistent mechanism, it works out a lot better because you don't have the error condition. So that's one of the reasons they did it. There were other things they did, and I'll talk to you afterwards, offline maybe, and we can talk about why they're good or bad. That's another issue. At any rate, to finish up, just to get to some questions here. We all stand on the shoulders of others, and we clearly stood on the shoulders of